Hey guys, it's Humane Hancock here, and welcome to the second episode in my podcast series. Now, in this podcast session, I'm talking with Temple Grandin. Temple is one of the most famous people in the field of animal welfare. In fact, HBO made a movie about her life. If you're watching on YouTube, I'll put the link to this trailer in the description box if you're interested. And you'll find examples of vegans who have protested talks given by Temple Grandin, but you'll also find examples of vegans praising Temple Grandin. And she was given an award by the animal rights organisation PETA. I observed that one of the major focuses in Temple's career has been to develop methods for killing animals, and she works directly with the meat industry, which makes me feel uneasy. But on the other hand, if you were to make a list of all the people in the world who have done the most to reduce farmed animal suffering, Temple's name would probably rank quite highly on that list. And there is certainly a part of me that at times feels like she's being too much of an apologist for the meat industry. But at the same time, I'm very glad that she's a strong force for improving animal welfare and that she's helped so many people care about the well-being of animals. In this very imperfect world we live in, I think Temple Grandin has been a big force for good, and I'm very grateful that she took the time to speak with me. Anyway, thanks for being here, and here's my conversation with Temple Grandin. So I think a good place to start, Temple, if you could take a couple of sentences to simply summarise the work you've been doing up to this point in your life.
Well, I want to find practical ways on the ground to improve things. I'm not a theoretical person. I'm a visual thinker. When I talk about stuff, I see it. I was talking about putting too many cattle in a pen at a feed yard. I'm seeing my old slides, and I've gone back through some of them, and the pens are stocked much less cattle in them. And I see those pictures are in black and white. They're old pictures. You see, it's not abstract.
Mm-hmm. So you're talking about, when you're talking about improving things, what exactly is the motivation behind what it is that you're doing in relation to your work with animals?
I like seeing, I've gotten emails from a parent that said that their autistic kid had a really great job now because of one of my lectures. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's an example of improving things. And making things work on the ground in the real world.
And in relation to your work with animals, what is the motivation you have? What are you trying to achieve exactly?
Well, I did the work on 20 years ago. It's all been published in our Journal of the American Veterinary Medical Association and Applied Animal Behavior Science on the welfare audits that I implemented for the large hamburger companies back in 1999. And we really cleaned up the slaughterhouses. And basically what we did is made them manage them and repair them. And we held them to some numbers. If more than 1% of those cattle fell down anywhere in their facility during handling, they'd fail an audit. They had numbers they had to make.
When you're talking about welfare reform and making changes, I'm interested to know what the underlying motivation is behind what you're doing. Why do you feel a drive to improve the welfare of animals?
Well, I don't like seeing them suffer. Okay, then we got the slaughterhouses fixed, and the biggest problem we had with stunning was broken equipment. No, now you're going to have to fix your equipment, and you're going to have to keep it fixed. And now what I'm saying when I go to a slaughterhouse is problems I have to fix at the farm. Mm-hmm. They're coming in really dirty, coming in lame. That wasn't caused by a trucker, and it was caused by either breeding, feeding methods, or conditions on the farm.
So your motivation to reduce the suffering of farmed animals is something that I've really related to. It's one of the main reasons why I want to talk to you. And even watching the HBO movie that they made about your life, there were moments in that film where it was quite emotional for me to watch, because I'm seeing how you're empathizing with these animals and you're empathizing with the suffering when people around you, I suppose, are kind of indifferent to the suffering of these animals. What did you think about the movie about your life?
I thought they did a very good job on showing how I think visually. They showed all my projects. I really liked that. Because the other reason for being interested in the movie is I'm seeing too many kids getting an autism label and they're just getting addicted to video games going nowhere. Mm-hmm. And I want to show them that you really can go somewhere. And I had to work very hard, because when I started out in the 70s, I was a lady in a man's industry. That was a gigantic barrier, much bigger than autism. I had to make myself really good at design. And I started out and I thought I could fix the whole world with design back in the 70s. What I found is I can design equipment and put it in a place it only fixes half the problems. The other half is the management, and management caring about doing stuff right.
I want to talk about the first time you felt like you connected with an animal emotionally, if you have any memory.
Well, I remember working some cattle one time in a feed yard. I was running a squeeze chute. We were vaccinating cattle, and I just got this really calm feeling. And then you can kind of convey that to the cattle, and they remained calm.
Right. So you saw that your actions can.
That's right.
Affect the welfare of the individual animal.
And then, you know, and when you were handling them really calmly, they weren't jumping around and getting all excited. You know, we had to vaccinate them. That's what we were doing at the time. You know, we were not doing something, you know, painful to them, except giving them vaccinations.
Caring about animal suffering, is this something that you had since you were a child, or was it something that developed as you grew older?
Well, I didn't get involved with farm animals until I was a teenager. That started when I went out to my aunt's ranch when I was a teenager. And this brings up another really important thing. Students get interested in things they get exposed to. And one of my big concerns today, there's a lot of kids aren't getting out and doing enough things. Schools have taken hands-on classes out of the schools. And you get exposed to something, you get interested in it. You know, well, it's something I'm interested in, or it's something I don't want to do. And so it basically started, you know, was not a childhood thing.
I want to start talking about specific issues that we're seeing in the world related to animals, not necessarily just for food. You've talked briefly before about the pet industry and selective breeding. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Well, I'm just really horrified. Some of the breeding we've done. This has all been done with regular breeding, no GMOs. If you overselect an animal for any single trait, I don't care if it's a food animal or it's a pet, you will wreck your animal, period. And the bulldog's been selected from our breed standards as a massive head. I've looked it up. Or do you stop on a massive head and a smashed in nose? To the point where they have to be all have cesarean sections, and they can't breathe even after they have the surgery. And then I like to show veterinary students a 1938 picture that was published in the New York Times. You can find it online. It's called Bulldog's Dilemma. And that 1938 bulldog looks very, very different than what you've got now. So how do we get into this mess? That's what I call bad becoming normal. It happens slowly, and you don't realize it. And then you've got young people coming in. I like to show them that Bulldog's Dilemma picture so that they, I mean, it's got some legs, it's got some snout. I mean, it actually functioned.
It's kind of ironic in a way, the suffering we're causing to pets, because people really do connect with their pet dogs and cats. They really love them, but I suppose they're maybe not aware of the effect that selective breeding is having on their welfare.
I don't think so. They you know, then you get someone says, well, that's just the breed that they can't exercise very much. And I look at that and I go, well, that's an abnormality. Or you take a food animal and you overselect for production traits. You know, they were having heart problems now in beef cattle we never had before. You know, 20 years ago, that just did not happen. I've been in this industry now almost 50 years.
The way in which we're using these animals for our own pleasure, I suppose. We want them to look cute. We want them to look a certain way. Yeah. And we're not really taking into consideration how it affects their well-being.
Well, the thing is, it's interesting. We've been having some very interesting animal welfare judging contests where students in animal science and the farming side and veterinary students have to judge scenarios on who has better welfare. And one of them was about dogs. And one of the scenarios was a bulldog that lived at a bookstore, born by cesarean, had tons and tons of veterinary care. The other dog was a Great Pyrenees that lived out on a farm, ran around outside, and had basic stuff like heartworm medicine and all its vaccinations. It had that. And the thing that was interesting was the split between the type of student. The veterinarians went with the bulldog because they equated more medical care with welfare. And all the people that were animal behaviorists like me went with the Great Pyrenees. And that was very interesting Now, other scenarios that they had on these animal welfare judging contests for farm animals, you didn't have that split.
Right.
But there was a thing that thought, well, if you do all this, care, I'm seeing a cat has trouble breathing.
Mm-hmm.
And I can relate to that because I have 2 broken noses. Everything's broken up in here. And I fell in a restaurant. My nose went down and smashed on the table edge as I went down. And broke everything in there. So I have perpetual sinus problems.
Mm-hmm. And you feel that helps you
maybe
empathize.
I really relate to that bulldog's going to have trouble breathing.
Right. This reminds me of something you're quoted as saying quite often, and that's how you believe that your autism helps you relate more to animals and understand their behavior better.
Well, you see, to understand animals, you got to get away from verbal language. It's a sensory-based world. What is it? Seeing, hearing, smelling. I see people yanking their dogs away from the tree that it wants to smell. And it doesn't have any social life.
Mm-hmm.
When I was a child, all the dogs ran loose and we didn't have all the behavior problems. Now right now with COVID, the dogs are having a great time with their people. But I have a friend who now got a job and now her dog has to be at home while she's at work. And the dog chewed up her pajamas. And he chewed out the rear end of the pajamas because that would have most of her scent on it. Well, that's separation distress.
Right.
That's why the dog ate up her pajamas.
What we've been talking about with the pet industry and the selective breeding, in terms of solutions, what we can do to make this better, what do you think people should be doing? Should we be boycotting the pet breeders, and should we just be adopting animals? Or what are the solutions here?
Well, one of the things you can do is breed bulldogs that don't have such extreme traits. In other words, let's breed for functionality. Okay, one thing that beef cattle are doing is being done right now. They started getting leg problems when they just selected for meat, and now they're doing leg confirmation inspections. Mm-hmm. So the animal's got to function, got to be able to walk, not have heart failure. You might have to back off a little bit on the muscle production to get rid of the leg problems and the heart failure problem. You mentioned back off just a little bit. The bulldog, well, let's breed a little more snout, and if they have trouble breathing, that animal gets neutered. You don't breed it.
Mm-hmm. We've talked a bit about farmed animals and how they can suffer with things like heart failure. What are the pressures that are forcing farmed animals to become a certain way? Well, and what problems are they getting as a result of it?
Well, the thing that's a problem is sustainability. Sustainability and welfare can sometimes be at odds, because if you breed an animal to make lots of meat, it uses a lot less feed. Like in chicken, it can be 15 to 20% less feed. Or a dairy cow can produce, if each cow gives out more milk, you're producing milk, the same amount of milk with a lot less cows.
Right.
But what we need to be doing is looking at optimal. In other words, we don't go back totally to old fashioned, but let's just back off just a little bit so you don't have some of these other problems. And the chicken industry, the broilers have actually, they bred a really heavy leg on a broiler. They've changed the feeding the chicks a little more roughage in the feed, slow them down just a little bit. Then you don't get the heart attacks. It's optimizing it.
So at this moment in time, the animal agriculture industry have been selectively breeding these animals to create more meat, more eggs, more milk for less cost.
Well, cost, and also, from a sustainability standpoint, if you get more milk with less cows, that helps on some of the sustainability issues, like the amount of feed you use, for example. If you were to go all the way back to old-fashioned broiler chickens, that's 20% more feed. So if another truck pulls up at the truck stop full of feed, that doesn't look very good. You see, I see it. I got 4 trucks at the truck stop of grain, and then another one rolls up. That's an awful lot of grain. You see, I see that. But what happens with these things is you change it slowly. You get bad becoming normal. Now, one of the reasons why I would see these things is when I go over to the slaughterhouse, I see animals from many, many different places. And you get one particular grower that really pushes them, and you got all these problems. And then you have another grower that doesn't do that. And these animals are beside each other in the pens at the slaughter plant. I saw this with pigs years ago when they just bred for rapid gain, leanness, and they got lameness problems, and they got animals that were real aggressive and real excitable. And I could see that because they'd be next to another bunch of pigs. But if you only see your own pigs, you don't, the bad becomes normal, happens slowly, just like on the bulldog, and you don't realize it.
Right. You don't realize the changes that are happening right in front of you. In relation to chickens who are laying eggs, what are the differences that the selective breeding has caused in the number of eggs they're producing, and how is this affecting their welfare?
Well, some of the chickens, when they just selected just for feed conversion and eggs, in other words, you eat just a little bit of grain for a whole pile of eggs, you got hyper chickens. I remember looking at those, and that was quite a while ago, and they beat their feathers off. And even when you put those chickens in really nice housing, their feathers still look terrible.
The way in which we're making egg-laying hens produce more eggs is causing problems because they put so many nutrients into the egg, like so much calcium, and it can cause
that's the problem. Then there's no skeleton. The skeleton gets really weak.
So one of the things I'm keen to talk to you about, I kind of want to paint a picture of what's happening to animals, and the problem is there's a lot of complexity here, because depending on the species, depending on the location, it's going to change. So sorry, I just want to ask you this, or sort of set this picture out. So I'm trying to make it more specific, and I want to talk specifically about pigs. So I want to know about the typical pig in a typical Western country. Now, as far as I know, like one of the problematic things that happens in the early stages of a pig's life is mutilations, such as tail docking. Could you talk to us a bit about tail docking? Like what is it? Why do we do it?
Well, because other pigs bite the tails, and if you get that started, it's really bad. And there are some genetic influences on the tendency to tail bite. And you can, to a certain extent, breed against it. Another thing that will help prevent it is providing environmental enrichments for them to chew. When you look at the things that you need to be using for environmental enrichment, you got to look at what does that animal do in nature. Pigs chew stuff and root all day. And you throw in a flake of straw, and they will they'll chew that, and then it clogs up your waste system. So there's been various enrichment things invented that give pigs stuff to chew up, and that helps to reduce the tail biting. So you approach it both with the environment and not selectively breeding against tail biting.
Right. So an alternative to tail docking, which is the clipping or pulling off of tails, is to alter their environment so they have more space and more stimulation.
More stimulation, and then the kind of genetics that's prone to tail biting, you stop breeding that genetics, just like with the roosters that I discussed previously. They had just bred for fertility and repro, and he was attacking the hens and even killing them. And then 15 years later, they corrected that problem. And it was done with breeding, just done with regular breeding.
Another thing that when I first found out about this, I could barely believe it, that in the majority of male piglets in Europe and the US are being castrated without anesthesia, without pain relief.
Well, the research is very clear. They need pain relief. Well, I also know now that you do a lot more intact bulls, for cattle. And I was over in Germany. They're doing intact boars for pigs. And it was very interesting, a difference in genetics, because I went to a big plant in Germany that was on the Dutch border. So you had both German breeding in this plant, and you had Dutch breeding. Now, the German boars would just come in, lay down, act like normal pigs, no problem. The Dutch pigs, when you unloaded them, it was like a sex orgy and a fighting orgy. And it was just the difference in the genetics. And there are the two kinds of pigs right beside each other in adjacent pens. And then it became very obvious the differences in the behavior.
I want to ask you specifically about the castration without the pain relief. Why is it that we're castrating pigs in the first place?
Well, we're doing it to prevent boar taint, which is the really nasty smell that most people don't want in their bacon. That's why you're castrating pigs.
So it seems to me that a bad odor that we get from our meat and castration without pain relief, like these two things are clearly in separate moral universes. I mean, the pain of the pig to be castrated, have their genitals taken off without pain relief, it's like so bad.
Well, it's totally bad. And there used to be, years and years ago, they did open heart surgery on human babies just with paralytic agents and no anesthetics.
Jeez.
That used to be done, and it wasn't that long ago that was stopped.
Are there any alternatives that we can use to avoid boar taint that don't involve castration?
Well, there's breeding, and there's also you can give them it's actually kind of a vaccine that immunizes them against the male hormones so that they just don't make the boar taint. That's being used a lot in Brazil. Now in Germany, they didn't seem to have much of a problem with boar taint, but I think they really were breeding against the male trait because there were a few pigs of the German breeding that came in with only one testicle. So I think they were really breeding against maleness. When you're at the meat plant, you get animals coming in from many different places. Okay, I've talked about problems with heart attacks, problems of lameness in beef cattle, in fed beef cattle. I went on a night shift one time, and there was a young kid working the cattle. He had a list of all the feed yards that night, and he knew which cattle were going to lay down and cause problems and not want to walk. They were his swear word feed yards. I will not repeat with the names he used for those feed yards. And then there were other cattle from other producers that were just fine, right there beside each other in the same plant. And then I've talked to people that inspect the livers, and they'll have a bunch of livers that are absolutely disgusting, and then the next bunch comes in and they're fine. And that's today, that's right now.
So Temple, sorry to interrupt. So we've talked, I kind of want to keep to the structure because I know I've only got a certain limited time with you and I want to fit in everything I want to ask you. We've talked a bit about the mutilations of animals, which we both, of course, agree is causing suffering to farmed animals. We'd rather that we weren't ripping their genitals off without anesthesia. We think this is bad.
Well, the research is very clear. They need to have pain relief. It's very clear.
But I suppose, what do you mean by that? Because it's kind of like we're getting into the territory of what we should be doing in terms of morality. What can research tell us?
What the research shows is very clear. You can look at their behavior. If you give them pain relief, you can see changes in the behavior, and you have less stress hormones. There's lots of papers. You can look them up on Google Scholar or the PubMed database. And there's probably 100 papers on this, different types of animals.
And I suppose one point is that it seems even we don't even need to look at the research to see that this is wrong. I mean, we can simply watch a video. We can watch a video. Yeah.
It hurts. I mean, there's no question about that. And the research is very clear.
Now, I want to move on to a different stage in the life of a pig, and that's confinement. And I want to talk specifically about gestation crates.
Well, that's something that needs to change.
Right. Can you talk?
And that is something years ago, about 20 years ago, I did a little survey on the airlines. And this is before there were any cell phones. And I had some pictures. And I had pictures of gestation stalls, ones where it wasn't, it was the right width. The pig could lay down in full lateral. And pictures of just finishing pigs on concrete slats. And I would show them to the passenger sitting beside me, whoever that was. And I would chat up the passenger first, about the weather, air traffic control delay or whatever. And then I said, I'm doing some consulting for a major company on standards for proper pig housing. I was deliberately vague. Then I put these pictures on their tray table. And what I basically found is that 2/3 of the people I talked to, when they found out that she couldn't turn around, that crossed a line that 2/3 of them said were absolutely not acceptable. And then 1/3 sort of just didn't care. I talked to a guy who sold oil filters for cars. He could have cared less. But I talked to a patent attorney. I talked to retired military that thought this was just absolutely terrible. And I did this just for my own knowledge, it's not published because I had to do it as a journalist. Because to do it as a scientist, I'd have to get permission from the airlines to do that, which would have been impossible. And I was really discreet about it. But I just wanted to find out, and I let the airline's computer pick out the focus group that would sit beside me.
Now,
now I would just show them pictures on a phone, but I didn't have the phones didn't exist then.
So Temple, it seems really intuitive that an animal not being able to turn around is torture. But sorry, just to finish this point, moving away from our intuitions, what are the behavioral indications that pigs are suffering in gestation traits?
Well, one of the things a pig doesn't have is any roughages to chew on. I'll never forget the guy who had hunting dogs, and I showed him that gestation stall. He says, I wouldn't put my dogs in that. And this was a guy from Texas, and he installed oil field equipment, gas industry equipment.
How can we tell that the pigs are suffering in these gestation traits?
Well, there's the thing that actually might be one of the biggest concerns for the pig is they don't have any roughages. You see this not having roughages to chew, because a lot of the behavior, like bar biting, you can prevent by feeding them little handfuls of long straw. I want to emphasize long straw. It's got some fiber in it. But no, my sisters hate gestation stalls. I'll never forget the Christmas dinner we had at my family. This was a good long time ago, and she'd seen some show on TV about gestation stalls, and that was what all we talked about. My sister Katie, you're not going to sell her a gestation stall. She thought it was terrible. And there's some stuff the industry needs to change. And the only reason they use them is because they're really efficient, and also less skilled people can manage them. Another problem is, when we bred for a lot of this leanness, we bred sows that would fight a lot. And what they've had to do to make group housing work is not have these sows that just do a lot of fighting. You had to breed a gentler sow.
Other than looking at the fact that the animals can't chew and their environment isn't suitably enriched, like, is there any research, anything that suggests that they're experiencing chronic frustration or anything like that?
Well, there's getting to be a lot of interest in research now on positive emotions. Okay, the first thing you got to do in animal welfare is prevent abuse. Like somebody took a stick and poked it in the eye. That would just be an act of abuse. And then you do things like reduce lameness. That prevents suffering. But is the animal actually having a life worth living? This is something that David Malort talks about. Does it have a life that's actually worth living? Does it have positive emotions? Well, you want to see some positive emotions in a dairy cow. You can go online and type in video cow motorized brush, and you will see them going all over their body like this, and they're loving it. They're loving it. And I'm not supposed to say, as a scientist, I'm not supposed to say they're loving it, but cows love this brush. And there's tons of videos online that show that.
Yeah, it's very clear that animals have the capacity to experience positive emotions like we do. And it is very nice to see an animal that's historically been treated very poorly actually getting some pleasure out of being alive.
They get pleasure out of these brushes. And one of the things I'm very interested in are the Jack Penskep emotional systems. They've been in the neuroscience for years. I discuss them in my book, Animals Make Us Human. I go over in Animals Make Us Human. In fact, in the UK, it was marketed as Making Animals Happy. But in Animals Make Us Human, we review the Penskep emotional systems. All people have them, all animals have them. And there are different brain systems down the base of the brain. We share with animals fear. That's a proper scientific word. Anger. Then you have separation distress. And separation distress is a different emotion than fear. So now that all the dogs are so happy during COVID because their owners are home, but now as soon as the owner had to get her first job, the dog was chewing up her stuff. You know, that was separation distress. Then you have the urge to explore, seek, the urge to explore. Some dogs want to just run and chase the ball. Another Labrador retriever's lazy, doesn't care about the ball. Then you have the mother-young nurturing. That's the oxytocin system. Then, of course, you have sex. And then you have play. And this is neuroscience. But
Yeah.
one of the problems we have in science is compartmentalization. For years, that was over in neuroscience. Well, I've been a big proponent of teaching students about the Jack Penske emotional systems.
So, Temple,
And all people and animals have them. Now, I don't think earthworms have them. I'm not going to worry about oyster welfare. That I'm
right,
not
right.
gonna worry about that.
You're interested in beings that have the capacity to suffer.
I'm actually trained in the neurosciences. And you look at brains. Now, I've dissected. I've had a chance to dissect the human brain, and I've dissected various animal brains. And where the emotions are, that's across all the mammals, it's about the same. The big difference between human beings and the other animals is the size of the cortex. We've got a computer sitting up here vastly superior to the animals. So I think we have the same emotions, but since you got a big computer here to filter it through, humans might go write a sad poem when they're grieving. Dog's not going to do that.
Right.
But when it's got separation distress and grieving are basically the same thing.
I see. So you're saying that the raw feels of sadness, pain, we share these in common with other animals.
Yeah, we share them with animals. That's right.
Let's talk about the transportation of animals. I suppose for most pigs in the world, the first time they see the sun will be on the journey to the slaughterhouse. Yeah. In terms of the transportation of these pigs, what are some of the problems and the challenges we're faced with in relation to their welfare?
Well, with any animal, the first thing is you have to put a fit animal on that trailer. So you've got some issues with old sows. They have to be fit for transport. You have to make sure you don't overload that trailer. But you also have to not have lame animals. And you can have, I've seen lameness in market hogs that was strictly genetics. It was leg conformation. The other thing you have to have is a farmer that walks through the pens, because if you got to get your pigs used to people walking through them, so they'll quietly move away when you walk in there. Because if you don't do that, that makes loading a truck a nightmare, because they stick together and squeal. So the producer has to work on walking pens. I've worked with a lot of clients on getting their producers to walk pens, and we would actually keep track of who had bad pigs. Where they were not walking the pens.
So my limited experience with this, I actually went to visit outside of a slaughterhouse so I could see the pigs before they went in and see what kind of condition they were in. And I saw this one pig, and it stuck with me ever since, who was just constantly throwing up constantly over and over again. It seemed like this animal was suffering quite a lot. How common do you think
some people get car sick? You didn't have a whole trailer full of pigs throwing up. That you did not have.
Absolutely.
That did not happen.
No.
But there are certain individuals, they're monogastric, the same as us. And there's a few individuals that are going to get car sick.
Yeah, and I suppose the other thing to consider is that just because someone isn't throwing up doesn't mean they're not feeling nauseous. And I suppose we have to remember that this will be the first time they've ever been in a vehicle that's traveling.
Well, what tends to happen when you look at some of the data is the most stressful part of the journey lots of times is the loading and unloading.
Right.
Especially if the farmer hasn't walked the pens to get the pigs used to people walking through them. Then they tend to settle down on the truck. As he said, for most of the time, the pigs were just real quiet, and some of them snuggled up, and he just laid there with them.
Now, I want to move on to what happens to the animals once they're in a slaughterhouse. And we know that most animals in the developed world, at least, go through a process of stunning where they're rendered unconscious.
That's right.
But this hasn't always been the case. Do you know when this started happening? When the stunning was implemented?
Well, in the U.S., it was in the 50s when they passed the Humane Slaughter Act. They used to just hang pigs up alive in the 50s in the U.S. It's something that's relatively recent.
That's quite terrifying.
Now, I've been in the industry 50 years, so they've been stunning the animals for as long as I've been in the industry.
It's very distressing to think about the fact that countless individuals have simply been slaughtered while fully conscious. It is certainly good that we've had these welfare reforms. If we're going to kill them, we want to do it in a way that's painless, don't we? We don't want them to go through unnecessary suffering.
Well, you go and you see that this is a term I don't like, unnecessary suffering, because I work in the practical world and I do a lot of work with food buyers, and I have to have very clear guidance on who to kick off the approved supplier list.
Hmm.
Well, let's say I kick somebody off the approved supplier list and my auditing company gets sued, and I've been through this mess. And then we're fighting in court on what unnecessary suffering is.
Right.
Where it's much easier to say you have something where they poked the pig in the eye with a stick.
Hmm.
Yeah, that would be an act of abuse. The thing I've learned, at least with our legal system, is if we're going to kick a supplier off the list,
Hmm.
we have to have very clear thou shalt nots, where nobody's going to argue in court about what it means. And the problem with a term like unnecessary suffering is, what is that?
For sure. That's
the problem, because I'm looking at it, how do I actually enforce this? And then we might have to take a slaughterhouse and take them off the list, or take a farm off the list.
Mm-hmm. I understand. I'm probably, I'm not familiar with the complexity of working with these companies. You've been going to court against
I've worked
meat
with a
companies.
lot of big corporations.
Sure.
And it was very interesting. I took them out on the tours where we got the suits out of the office, and they saw bad things. And one of the reasons why we have 2 super good vaccines now is because one lady scientist walked a dog by food refrigerate, the kind of trucks we use for hauling food. They're putting bodies in them.
Hmm.
And then Pfizer opened up the bank vault to develop that vaccine, because she was high enough. She was a suit, and she saw that.
Yeah, it
makes me sick that the things we haul food in have dead bodies in them. I hope they junk those trailers when this whole mess is over.
Mm-hmm.
That just makes me sick.
Yeah.
And when people get out and see real things, had a big stash of cash. And they bankrolled that research.
This is the power of people actually seeing what's actually happening out there in the real world, and we can relate it to animals as well. I mean, so many people aren't aware of mutilations and gestation periods.
But then on the other hand, I've taken a lot of people out to feed yards, and when the pens are dry and a decent pig farm, a lot of the passengers, when on the airline, my little airline survey that I did years ago, looked at the pigs in the concrete floor, brightly lit barn, and go, well, that's nice. They look clean. They were not upset by that. Mm-hmm. The thing that upset them was when they found out sows couldn't turn around for most of their life. 2/3 of the public had a big problem with that.
Of course, yeah, as I think we all do. We've been talking about stunning. I want to specifically talk about CO2 stunning. This is happening to the majority of pigs in a lot of countries. It's kind of seen as the standard. Yeah. What exactly is CO2 stunning? What's happening?
All right, let me just explain. I'm going to do a very quick thing on electric stunning. Okay, when you electrically stun a pig, and you do it correctly, instantly unconscious, like turning off the light switch.
Yes.
That is very clear. But the problem with electrical stunning is you've got to get the electrodes on in the right place. So I've got to hold the pig to do that. So most of the big places that were doing that were lining them up in single file race, and I've got to get them on a conveyor restrainer, and I have to use some electric prods to do that. So I've got a stunning method there that's instantaneous and works perfectly, but getting the pig up to it's harder. Now on the CO2 stunning, you can have a really wonderful handling system. Handle them in groups, ban electric prods. So the handling is really super good. But now the problem is that CO2 is not instantaneous. It takes 20 seconds or something like that, pig to go unconscious. So, and there is research, and I've also looked inside those machines, and some pigs are trying to get out and having a really bad time. And one thing I have observed, there's a genetic difference.
Right. So
there are some genetics that have a much better reaction than others. Now, poultry, this is where you have a species difference. If you very gradually increase the CO2, their reaction is fine. You see, this is where there is a species difference here.
Absolutely. Temple, it seems that how long it's not instant with CO2 stunning.
No, it's not.
How long the animals suffer is going to depend on factors such as the specific breed of pig and the concentration of CO2 that they're receiving.
The concentration of CO2, the big plants, your pigs, you want to dip them in high concentrations fast.
As I understand it, always seems to be a period of suffering with CO2 stunning.
Well,
Am I right in saying that? Even if whether it's 15 seconds or whether it's a full minute, there seems to be a period where pigs are suffering in
I
there.
think that period could range from discomfort to really bad, depending upon pig genetics.
And what
I've looked into a lot of these machines.
What do you think that the pigs are, say, in a bad case? What do you think the pigs are experiencing?
Where I draw the line on welfare, if you get an escape reaction, where they try to get out at the top of the container, that's absolutely not acceptable.
Do you think that's common with CO2 stunning?
I don't. You see, now there's also been experiments with other gas systems. I've looked at a lot of these scientific papers. There's also been experiments with a low pressure atmospheric system that works with chickens, and it was a failure in pigs. It damaged their ears and caused ear pain. They were hoping that might be able to replace CO2 stunning in pigs. It was a failure for pigs.
Am I right in saying that there's a decent chance that the pigs who are feeling unpleasantness in these chambers are feeling a burning sensation in their lungs?
Yeah, they probably would be. But the other thing you have to look at is there's degrees of discomfort.
Yeah.
And you always have to balance back against your handling system. One advantage I have with any kind of controlled atmosphere stunning system, regardless of what you put in it, is I can completely eliminate a lot of handling issues because they go in as a group. Electric prods can be banned in those systems.
Sure. In some ways,
some trade-off there.
So Temple, in some ways it's better than electrical stunning and bolt pistols, but in other ways it seems to be really bad. I mean, we were talking about research. There's research suggesting that pigs prefer to go days without water rather than being exposed to CO2.
Not days without water.
I can send you the research for this after the video call.
There are genetic differences, and that needs to be studied, and it's not been looked at.
Absolutely, but it seems that regardless of the genetics of the breed of pig, it seems that there's always a period of suffering here. I mean, to make my point, there's lots of video footage of pigs going through these.
I've seen it. I've seen it.
Yeah, we're talking hours and hours of uncut footage of pigs going in constantly, and I've seen a lot of this stuff. Every single time I've watched it, pigs are screaming in agony. They're thrashing, trying to get out. I mean, the messages from animal agriculture seems to be that this is the humane standard for killing pigs. I mean, am I missing something here? This seems like a terrible way to go.
Well, the trade-off is with the very best electrical stunning systems, and I've been in some of them, I can get the electric prod use down to 15%. And then the others don't have any electric prods. Yeah, that would definitely be better welfare. But I can't eliminate electric prods. If I have to line them up in a single file race to get them up to the restraint device, I have to restrain the pigs in a large plant for electric stunning. Otherwise, I can't get the electrodes on correctly. And they have to be in the correct position, pass the electricity through the brain.
But it seems that the people who suggest that CO2 stunning is the most humane way to stun pigs, well, they're kind of implying that there's no good way to kill pigs without torturing them. Because when I look at these videos, I'm seeing animal torture. Would you agree?
Well, some of those reactions are really super bad, and they're not acceptable. And where I draw the line with any animal, with any kind of a box you put it in, regardless of what you put in it or take out of it, if the animal tries to escape from the container, that is not acceptable. Escape movements are not acceptable.
Is there any footage available on the internet that shows pigs being put into CO2 gas chambers and not suffering, not gasping, not screaming, not trying to get out?
The very best stuff I've ever seen, and it's very old, and I only saw it live, was in Denmark, and it was about way over 20 years ago. I went to Denmark. That's when Patricia Barton was a scientist there. And I went in their research lab, and they had a CO2 chamber where elevator would go down to the CO2, and you could see the pigs walking around in this like elevator. And they were the Danish pig, no stress gene, and they did a little bit of this, just a very little bit, and then they fell over and went unconscious.
I suppose
that was pure breeding. Now again, that was over 20 years ago. I saw that, and they were free to walk around in this thing. They wouldn't allow any pictures. but I saw that. And then on that same trip, I went to Ireland and saw horrible reactions to CO2 on that same trip.
Mm. CO2 stunning is one of those things that when I look at the footage, I am in bewilderment that we're still doing this to them. Like I
Well,
can't.
I just want to let you know, I have about 20 minutes left before I'm going to have to go.
Okay, no problem. So let me move on a little bit then. Temple, since we haven't got much time and there's some other interesting stuff I really want to talk to you about, I guess I want to kind of end this section where we're talking about pigs.
Okay.
Given everything you know, I want to end it with like one or two questions. Given everything you know about what's happening to pigs, we're talking about a typical pig in a typical Western country. Would you want to be born as a typical pig in a typical Western country?
The animals, farm animals that have the most animal welfare issues are pigs and laying hens.
Mm-hmm. So
I'm gonna talk about it. That's it.
Would you feel happy to answer that question of whether you would feel whether you?
I'm going to just say, of the farm animals, pigs and laying hens have the most animal welfare issues.
Absolutely. Okay. Yeah. Now I want to talk a little bit about undercover investigations. Undercover investigation, it's kind of interesting because there's always pushback from certain meat companies when these investigations come out. I know that you've created some videos with some meat companies showing what the ideal should be like, how to go through the process without causing any suffering.
The way it should work.
Absolutely.
And I tell you, we did those videos very quickly. Most of those were shot in a single morning, and we didn't go cherry picking the footage because we didn't have that much footage.
Right.
And when a plant's well managed, that's what it looks like.
Yeah, I think it's really
badly managed. There's some undercover videos showing some really atrocious stuff.
Temple, I think it's really wonderful what you're doing to try and show how it can be done in a way that doesn't cause so much suffering to animals. And I think that, more power to you on that. With the videos, they call it, I believe, the Glass Walls Project. And they say things like showing what it's really like. Now, there's something I want to bring to your attention, but I think you've already made this point. So I've got a quote from you here that I really like. So I saw a video about slaughtering of horses in Canada. And in the video, you say, "I'm sick and tired of going to a plant, and I don't care what species it is. Everything is working fine when I'm there. And then as soon as I'm away, somebody gets in with a video camera and all sorts of bad stuff is going on in there. I get really, really angry about that."
Yeah, I do. And one of the things that's helped to reduce that is about 10 years ago, they started putting video cameras in the plants, audited by auditors in a mission control outside the plant on a random basis. That's helped a lot. Now people get clever about knowing exactly where the camera view is. I remember one time looking at it, somebody was prodding an animal just outside the camera's view.
Right.
That's behaving, sort of like you see a police car out on the road, then you slow down. It's, they see somebody with a clipboard's going to do an audit, then they behave themselves.
Do you think that when you...
Let me tell you what I've been seeing on the animal activist videos. I've been looking at those for years and years and years. And when they first started doing those videos, it was atrocious, like the famous Westland Hallmark video with dairy cows. That was disgusting.
Sure.
Knocking her over with a forklift. I mean, really.
Yeah, terrible.
Really, really atrocious, bad stuff. Now, the videos I'm seeing more recently, the out and out acts of abuse, like knocking a cow over with a forklift. There's a lot less of that kind of stuff. And, they just show the gestation stalls.
Yeah, the standard practices.
Shown some farms that were in big need of repairs, gigantic need of repairs. They'll find a few chickens that are injured and show you. But then they don't show you all the other good chickens that are there in the barn.
Sure, yeah, sure. It's important that we show the public the truth and not like a biased picture.
They'll go in a broiler barn and...
Temple, sorry to interrupt. This idea of when you go to a factory farm and a slaughterhouse and there's cameras there, do you feel that the companies you're working with are going to be honest, or do you think that they're going to be doing things differently because you're there?
Well, there's some of that doing things differently because I'm there, but there's some that's not.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, equipment maintenance problems. I can tell the fresh welds, and you gotta remember, I come out of the construction industry.
Sure.
Fresh welds and things that they just did to fix it. I talked to some of the maintenance people, but right now the biggest problems I'm seeing in a slaughter plant are things I have to fix at the farm.
Mm-hmm.
Lame animals, for example. The truckers and the plant didn't cause that.
From my perspective, Temple, I suppose what I'm going to find compelling, that it's humane and that it's ethical, isn't going to be that we're going to film a specific day with Temple there and we're going to make sure it's all done correctly and this is the truth. What I'd find more compelling is if meat companies put video cameras in all the farms and slaughterhouses where their meat comes from, and live stream it to the public. And I mean, it wouldn't be expensive to do this in 2021, and workers would be able to remain. Workers would be able to remain anonymous because we can use AI to automatically blur the faces. Like, would you be in favor of implementing something like this, like a live stream to the internet?
I've actually suggested a thing called the Plant Tour webpage, where they could just tune in to different plants. Now, there was a chicken company that actually had that for a while. This was not for the slaughterhouse, but it was for farm to show their housing system. And if you looked at it at night, it was really boring when the chickens were asleep.
Sure.
But I think that's the kind of stuff we need to be doing.
Absolutely.
Just have the plant tour webpage, and you could go on a map of the country and click on different plants, and you then could click on a menu of different parts that you wanted to look at. And that's what we need to be doing. Now, in some rural areas, there will be bandwidth issues.
Sure. But generally speaking, this is an idea that we think we could put forward. Do you think that meat companies would be open? Would they voluntarily implement this, or would it need to be a government mandate?
Oh, yeah, let me tell you something from a meat plant manager's perspective. It's very demoralizing to a meat plant manager or a farm manager who's really tried hard.
Yeah.
And then just see everything being bashed. That's very, very demoralizing. Now, I suppose I know it's like to be on the other side of this.
Absolutely, but I think generally speaking, it's good that consumers can make an informed choice about where their food is coming from. And I think if we had this live streaming to the internet, and if the meat industry really felt unfairly represented by the undercover investigations, they could simply squash it all just by putting live streams of all the farms and slaughterhouses and showing everyone what's actually happening.
Yeah, it's a lot easier to do the slaughterhouses because there's a lot less of them. But no, I think that you need to be opening the door. When you get bashed, you need to be opening the door. But I also see, they get scared. And I have some students now that are working for some of these companies. And I talked to her just the other day, and she was getting scared about showing farm stuff because now they'll go into a farm and, okay, they find one animal that's got something wrong with it out of, quite a lot of hundreds of animals. And now we'll hold it up and we just take pictures of that. What about all the other good animals?
Absolutely, yeah.
You see, because part of the problem is that the motivation of some of these groups is to not to reform the industry, but to get rid of it.
Sure.
You see, that's the problem. And this can be a big fight. I want to reform the industry. I do not want to get rid of it.
I understand that.
And there's things that the industry needs to fix.
So Temple, I think you and me do have a philosophical disagreement in that I think it would be better if we weren't killing these animals at all. However, there are lots of places where we really do agree. We both want to reduce animal suffering.
That's right. We both would agree on that. And I've been looking at stuff on sustainable agriculture and what they call regenerative agriculture and our grazing animals. That would be our cattle, our sheep, our goats. They're part of the land. They help make some of the best cropland in the U.S. And they need to be integrated back in with the crops. There's a lot of things we can do with our grazing animals that we can actually do carbon sequestration. I've looked into a lot of this stuff. Grazing animals created some of the best farmland that we have in the U.S. Iowa and Illinois.
Well, just to reiterate, I'm really happy that you're behind and you're behind the idea and promoting the idea of sort of having cameras in slaughterhouses and live streaming to the public. I think this would be a really good way forward. That I would be all for that. But one of the things I'd put in there is I'd have a banner across the bottom that says, if you edit this video, pick out all the bad parts, we sue. And we're going to come out with a clause, the legal clause. Well, I think
don't misrepresent something where you're looking through hours of footage and they have one misdone and then you play that over and over again. What about all the other thousands of cattle they did just fine? It's not fair.
But of course,
I put that video up there, but you edit this. You can stream all you want, but you edit it, we will sue you.
Well, I suppose maybe suing wouldn't even be necessary. I think that if we're live streaming everything that's happening to animals, then the evidence is there. The public can see. Oh, look.
That's the thing. You see, but then somebody okay, they can just put their phone up to it and record it that way, and then they just pick out all the bad bits.
I understand what you're saying. I would just say that I think that if we were live streaming everything that was happening to animals, then
I think with a lot of stuff, I agree with that, and the price of the equipment's coming down, and we need to be showing what we do.
Now, there's something else I really want to ask you, and my listeners would hate me if I didn't ask you this. So you're someone who has clearly got lots of compassion and empathy for animals. A large part of your life has been devoted to trying to improve the lives of animals. And for that, myself, and I'm sure lots of other people who do boycott animal products, respect you for that and thank you for that. What I want to know, and it could be a difficult question, but I want to know if when you see the animals going in to be slaughtered, do you feel any conflict? Do you feel any moral dilemmas going on there? How does it feel for you?
Well, most cattle don't know. Most pigs don't know. They'll just walk in. The thing that makes me really angry is when I see lame animals getting off the truck, and it's due to breeding, or it's due to really rotten housing. Swollen legs on dairy cows because their housing was bad. That makes me mad. Or they have a heart attack that has due to breeding. It's all the welfare. That's what I find really makes me mad.
I understand that.
Because I can remember the days when, for fat feedlot cattle, you almost never had lame animals, and you certainly did not have them dying in the yards.
I relate to you in your desire to reduce suffering. We are both in 100% agreement there. I'm also kind of interested if you feel any moral conflict or dilemma about the killing of the animals. Does that ever enter your mind? Do you worry about it at all?
Well, I've been out and seen what the coyotes and the dogs can do to sheep or a small calf, and it's still alive and it's half skinned by coyotes.
I have the same.
Death in the wild is harsh and nasty.
Oh, I mean, wild animal suffering is something that I've been trying to raise awareness about. It's terrible what's happening to wild animals, and I wish that it wasn't happening. What I would say is that, regardless of what's happening in nature and what's happening to wild animals, I do think we should look at what's happening to farmed animals in and of itself, and look at how we can improve conditions like you have. And I suppose there will be people who disagree on the killing of the animals and whether it's fair to take their life away. But either way, like I said, it's good to focus on where we agree, and you and me clearly both want to reduce animal suffering, and for that I'm very thankful. I heard about this story. I mean, I don't know if you heard about this. Let me know if you did. There's a story in Iowa of someone called Matt Johnson who exposed a slaughterhouse who were roasting pigs to death during the pandemic. And he went to prison after this. And this brings up the broader issue of ag-gag laws. Do you know about?
Yeah, that's politics. I'm not going there. Yeah, there were very bad methods used to kill pigs when we had the pandemic. The big plants were shut down, and 300,000 pigs or so had to be destroyed out in the farms and just thrown away. That was absolutely horrible, and there was methods used that should not have been used.
Absolutely, yeah. Sorry, I don't want to get you to talking about politics. I just meant
talk about politics.
That's understandable. I generally don't do that much either. I just felt like there's kind of an ethical issue of trying to.
Let me just try to tell you where I come from. To make actual change take place in the field, I don't care what it is. Doesn't have to be animals. It could be something else. You have to pick out something relatively specific. Because I was talking to a lady that works with where people with handicaps get abused by caregivers. And I said, you got to work on one specific thing. And she's doing that now, and it's being really effective. What I've done with slaughter plants, it's something specific. And I was surprised that 80% of the problems we were fixing with management, maintenance, and repairs.
Right.
I was actually surprised at that.
You're able to make a big difference to the lives of animals by doing things that don't even cost much to the meat industry.
No, out of those 75 plants, the original McDonald's supplier list back in 1999, which is most of all the big plants in the U.S., only 3 plants out of 75 had to do expensive front-end remodels.
Mm-hmm. Like I said, the things you've done to improve the lives of animals and get meat companies to change what they're doing to animals.
What made the meat companies do it? When buyers require it, they do it.
Mm-hmm.
But we've got to make sure the buyers don't force plants to do something that doesn't work.
Right.
There
we need
was
to be
a
focused on
poultry
outcomes.
plant a number of years ago that was forced to put in a stunning system that did not work.
Mm-hmm.
I think we'll leave out where it is.
Mm-hmm.
It's somewhere in the world, a large poultry plant. That's not very constructive.
Absolutely. Like you say, it's important that we're practical and we try and figure out how to actually make a difference to the animals in a way.
This made an expensive mess for
Sure. Yeah,
plant.
sure.
That's not constructive.
Well, we talked a lot about pigs, but I want to ask you a broader question about farmed animals more generally. When we think about the majority of farmed animals, do you think the majority of farmed animals are living lives that are worth living?
There's some farm animals that are definitely not living lives worth living. Now, the animal that probably has the least problems is beef cattle. Mm-hmm. Regardless of what market they go into, at least in U.S. beef cattle, the bulls and the cows are out on the pasture.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I go to other countries. I remember driving through the rural Spain. I didn't see any cattle. We were in cattle country. They were all inside barns.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And some of the conditions in those barns are good, and some of them are bad.
And if you
cattle, the way we raise beef cattle in the Western United States, they're totally free range, whether they go to the regular supermarket or to the organic outlets. And they've always been outside on pasture for as long as I've been around.
Right. So there's big differences between species and where we are in the world.
Big differences between species.
Absolutely. Right. Absolutely. And I suppose that you spent a lot of your time working with cows, which is probably one of the reasons why it's one of the better animals to be.
Well, let me just tell you about the afterword that's in this book. Mm-hmm. I wrote an afterword in here. And when I first started out in the 70s, cattle handling was really, really bad in the 70s. But in an Arizona feedlot and an Arizona ranch, the living conditions were good. Feedlot pens were dry. They had shade. Mm-hmm. When I first started out working with cattle, I was not exposed to muddy, disgusting feed yards. Once I got through the bad cattle handling, which I saw as a solvable problem, because there were a few people that actually did handle cattle right. And I had a wonderful rancher friend, Singing Valley Hereford Ranch. They handled their cattle beautifully. So I saw animals that did have a life worth living, and yes, a bad cattle handling situation that I saw as solvable.
So you're saying that there are cases where animals are living lives worth living.
Well, we had cattle in the big feed yards.
Sure.
With probably half the stocking density that they're using now.
But Temple, sorry to interrupt. In terms of what you know, the knowledge you have with animal behavior, in terms of the majority of farmed animals, do you think that the majority are living lives worth living?
We need to work on things one operation at a time.
But would you?
And I spend most of my time working with the big buyers because that drives change. But absolutely. I want to do constructive change.
Yes.
Not force a poultry plant to put something in that did not work. That was not smart. That happened.
Absolutely.
And I was in that plant.
I agree with you. We need to look at specific instances of what we can change. Where's the low-hanging fruit? What can we do to make things better for animals? But I don't want to.
Indoor cattle. There are some indoor cattle that they've got crappy lives.
Yeah.
And there's other indoor cattle where their lives are decent.
I suppose, from my perspective, one of the things we need to do if we're going to make things better is we need to acknowledge the problems. And that's why I don't want to push you too hard on this, but to me, it seems very obvious that the majority of farmed animals are living quite terrible lives. Would you agree with me on this?
I'm going to work on things step by step.
Absolutely.
And at a time.
And I respect you for that. And it's important to, like I said, to look at the specifics. What can we do? Incremental. How can we make things better for these animals? Practically, what can we do?
Well, I think there's some housing, very, very confined housing systems, like small battery cages for hens need to be phased out. And
Absolutely.
gestation stalls need to be phased out. I will say that. Those two systems need to be phased out.
Yes, and just to be clear here, Temple, like I'm vegan, but I'm not seeing you as the enemy. I see you as a friend for animals. But do you understand my point about acknowledging the problem of what actually is reality for animals? Because I find it really hard to not say that the majority of farmed animals, we're talking about chickens and farmed fish, like these animals are living miserable lives. And I think we have to acknowledge that if we're going to do something about it.
I have to work in the industry. No politics.
Okay, I understand that.
I have to work in the industry.
Yes, you have. I understand. I think I understand what you're saying in that you're thinking about it from an outcome perspective, and how can you do the most good? How can you
remember? I'm an equipment designer.
Yeah.
I come out of the construction industry originally, and my first professional group was ag engineering. It's all about outcomes. I'm very, very proud of the McDonald's audits that I implemented in 1999. I was amazed at how much I was able to fix the slaughter plants without remodeling them, with the existing equipment that they had there. Management, maintenance, and simple changes and repairs.
I understand that. I guess certain public figures like yourself probably need to be careful in how they frame things and what they say, because you want to make things better for the animals. And look, if you didn't work within the meat industry,
there's things that people aren't very happy with me about. I've spoken out about heart attacks in cattle, lameness caused by various reasons. Another issue I've spoken out about that doesn't make me too popular is the need for feedlot cattle to have shade. I've spoken out about that. Some specific things like this has not made me real popular.
Absolutely, and I think that's inspiring of you to do that, and more power to you.
And the thing that I can say, if you read the afterword of Animals Make Us Human, it's called Making Animals Happy in the UK. It's the same book. When I first started in the 70s, cattle handling was atrocious, but the living conditions for the cattle in the big feed yards were good. They had shade, and they had about half the stocking density that they have now.
I appreciate that you are very outcome focused. You are working within the industry to make as much change as possible, and the change that you have made is quite incredible. It's inspiring to people like me who are looking at how things can actually change. Wow, you're someone who's actually actually made a difference. Made a real difference to the lives of animals, and like that's amazing. Like I said, I see you as a friend to animal advocates like myself. I guess maybe where we differ, or a perspective I have that you don't, is just that I feel like I would be doing a disservice to the billions and billions of individuals who are suffering if I don't acknowledge that the majority of farmed animals are living miserable lives. And once we acknowledge that, then we can start to do something about it, I think.
Well, let's put it by regions and countries.
Okay.
Very big differences between different regions of the world and different countries, and we'll leave it at that.
Okay.
I will not name them.
Temple, I'd like to ask you about, we talked a bit about low-hanging fruit and being practical to make things better. What do you think are some of the low-hanging fruit changes that could be implemented to improve animal welfare?
Well, I think some places have got to back off on stocking density in a lot of animals, but that doesn't explain all of the welfare. You measure outcomes. Let's take broiler chicken, for example. You have to manage your ventilation for moisture removal in your building, so your chickens don't get mucky and dirty. And the reason in cold climates they don't do this is they don't want to pay the gas company to heat the outside. So they reduce the ventilation changes. And then you can get into some really mucky messes with chickens, where the conditions go from good to atrocious because you didn't ventilate the building enough to clear the moisture out.
Something else I heard, this is something you were quoted as saying, so do correct me if it's wrong. Is it true that you tried to go vegan for a month?
Yes, I did. And I cannot function on a vegan diet. I have tried it.
Absolutely. Temple,
just there are genetic differences, and I cannot function on a vegan diet. I have tried it.
Yeah. So Temple, just to be clear, I'm not trying to debate you or convince you to go vegan. What I'm interested in, though, is what motivated you to try it?
Well, because I'd read about it and I tried it when I was in my 20s. And what I find sometimes if I just sort of lapse into vegan, because I just, I had a salad at this meal and, cheese pizza or something. Well, that's not vegan. But I find that I get lightheaded, and I know
Sure.
other people that have kind of similar genetics. They find they've got to have some animal protein.
Look, I'm not a medical professional. I don't want to talk about that, but I am very interested in like, were you motivated for ethical reasons at all?
Well, that was one of them, but I found that no, there's no way I could be a vegan.
Fair enough.
And my health would suffer.
Yeah.
And there's other people where they do just fine on that diet.
Are you sympathetic to people who look at the current state of animal farming and think, well, until
there's a lot of stuff that has to be improved, very definitely.
Yeah.
And the thing is, I want to talk about how do we fix it rather than just saying how terrible everything's terrible.
Yeah, we need to
I'd
fix
rather
it.
How do we fix it? Well, I started out thinking I could fix everything with engineering. I found I can fix about half the problems with engineering. Other half is management.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very complicated issue. I suppose what I would say is perhaps the acknowledging that things are currently terrible and trying to make things better and how to fix it. Perhaps these two things aren't mutually exclusive.
We also have to make sure that we don't make mistakes, like forcing a poultry plant to put in a piece of equipment that failed. Very expensive mess. That's not constructive.
Okay,
that doesn't, all I did is really make a poultry plant angry. Spend a whole pile of money on a piece of equipment that absolutely did not work.
Right. This is why I suppose we need to be careful and make sure that our interventions are based on research and evidence. We have to
make sure that the things we force them to do work.
Of course.
Yeah, that's really, really important. And I worked, now what we did with the McDonald's audits, we forced them to repair their stunners and keep them repaired, to put a non-slip floor on a loading ramp. Then they had to work on reducing their electric prod use. The thing that made me happy was I used all my design ability to figure out how to make whatever they had there, and a lot of that equipment, some of it was kind of junky actually, make it work with simple changes. And then there's other things. You see, when we get out on the farm, there's certain systems we need to phase out, like the small battery cage for hens. That needs to be phased out.
Right. Are you hopeful that it will be?
I think it will be eventually. Yeah, that needs to be phased out, and we can't. And it has to be phased out, not overnight, because you'll have a wreck if you do that. But that some of these very restrictive systems, like sow stalls and small battery cages for hens, need to be phased out.
Absolutely. I suppose it's difficult because we feel, when you look at the suffering of the animal, you feel an urgency, but also practically speaking, we know that it takes time.
Let's look at things like switching over to group housing. There's a lot of different options. You want to do it and have it work. You also have to have a manager who wants to make it work. I cannot emphasize that enough. The management has to want to make something new work.
What's it?
Things that when I designed some equipment that's totally new, put it in plants. When I picked out my first plant to put it in, I had a plant that had a plant manager and an assistant plant manager that both wanted to make it work.
From your experience of working within the meat industry, how has it been interacting with people working there? Do you find that they share your passion to reduce animal suffering, or is there some? It's
been really interesting, and I've seen in the industry. In the beginning, it was all grr, and hackles up, but now there's a lot of people in the industry really getting behind it. And we have a really good animal welfare meeting every year with our National Trade Association, the North American Meat Institute. And yes, attitudes within the industry are changing.
And the public perception of it.
A wonderful Zoom conference where people in a large corporation were showing off their animal welfare projects. And the CEO was on that call. There were like 30 presentations. I went to about 20 of them. And they ranged from simple things like improving litter management of chickens to remodeling a major piece of equipment. That would not have happened 10 years ago.
Yeah, it's
So within the industry, things are changing for the better.
Absolutely, and I think that's in part because of people like you. So it's really positive to see change happening.
I really do have to get going now.
Oh, okay, fair enough. Can I ask you one more question before you leave? So, given what we know about the current state of animal farming and the selective breeding we were talking about before that's causing issues to animals, how realistic do you think it is to have a humane animal farming system on a mass scale where everyone's eating meat every day?
Big can be managed well. The problem with big is it's fragile.
Mm-hmm.
And when it breaks, you have a lot of problems. That's the reason why 300,000 pigs had to be destroyed on the farm when we had the pandemic and the plant shut down.
Temple,
but it's fragile.
Absolutely. Temple, I don't want to keep you any longer because it's very kind of you to have given me this much time.
My phone's been buzzing away in my pockets.
I'm very sorry about that.
Okay.
So I just want to thank you again for giving me the time to talk to you like this. I know you probably have a lot of controversy with vegans, protests and things like that. And
I've had some vegans attack me, and there are some people where you can't talk to them rationally and discuss. We can agree or disagree on certain things, but other things we agree.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's important to focus on where we agree. And I can't speak for all vegans here, but I will say that while I understand that you and me have some philosophical differences in what we want, I respect everything you have done to help animals suffer less. And I hope I can have a fraction of the impact you have had. I think it's inspiring.
The thing you have to do is find out what's actually going on out in the field. And we have 2 fabulous vaccines because a vice president lady scientist at Pfizer saw rows of refrigerated trucks that we normally haul food in used as a morgue.
Yes.
That's seeing reality.
Yeah.
And Pfizer opened a bank vault to develop that vaccine.
Yes, that's an inspiring story, and it suggests that people need to see what's actually happening out there so that we can gain the motivation to do something about it.
And this lady has a dog, and they were walking it. And that's when they saw the trailers.
Yeah,
I start to get choked up now when I'm talking about that.
No, I understand.
I am getting choked up.
Well,
I've got one shot right now, the Pfizer vaccine, and the right person got out of the office and saw something really bad. And that's why we have this vaccine, which uses the RNA technology. Been around for a long time, but it had just stayed in the lab. And they made it real.
Temple, it's really beautiful to
see. And when I saw her interviewed on 60 Minutes, I was crying.
Temple, I think that it's really inspiring the compassion you have and the empathy that you have and how much you have a desire to make the world a better place. And while some vegans may disagree with you and protest you, anyone who suggests that you're not empathizing with animals or other people, I think is collectively wrong.
But the other thing is, a lot of this stuff gets discussed in the abstract.
Yes.
Okay. When you have the financial people looking at spreadsheets, and then it's all abstract. It's just about the money. And you get the suits out of the office. And I did that with McDonald's, Wendy's, and Burger King about 25 years ago when we first started doing that. And they saw some bad stuff, and it motivated them to make change. And then when I trained the food safety auditors, they were skeptical at first, and then they could see the good they were doing.
And this is
and
exactly.
They got to get out of the office. People in charge got to get out of the office and see what's going on the ground.
Absolutely. And I suppose that's what's happened in your life. You looked at animal farming, you saw that bad stuff was happening, and you've devoted your life to trying to make things better. And
we've got there's too much stuff where the activism is way too abstract.
Right.
And with no way to fix stuff.
Right. We need to be practical and
then what happened after the lady scientist saw horribleness. A technology that's been in the lab for many, many years, because I've looked up the papers, was
Mhm.
pulled out of the lab
I
and
I
made
understand.
real. Then sometimes you get some big change, because when we worked on those McDonald's audits, what happened there is we forced them to manage those plants.
Hmm.
And when they were forced to manage them, there was a huge change. Now, the advantage with the slaughterhouses is easy to fix. Much easier to fix than farms are, because there's some stuff out in the farms where we're going to have to, phase out certain systems
Hmm. I don't
and
want to keep.
replace them with different equipment.
I'm aware of how long I've taken and how much you said you wanted to leave like half an hour ago. So I don't want to take you any longer. I'll just bring it back to the initial thing we talked about at the start of the conversation, and that was you talking about your underlying motivation to reduce animal suffering.
And I want to figure out, we got to make things that work. And I don't want to do something like force a poultry plant to put a piece of equipment in that did not work. And I could have told them before it was shoved down their throat, it was not going to work.
Absolutely. You have the motivation to reduce suffering, and for that I'm grateful, and I'm very happy that I think the world is a better place because you exist, and I want you to know that.
Well, thank you, and I appreciate that. And I've got a meeting with another person coming up, and then I've got to look at the phone that's buzzed now 3 times.
Well, thank you so much, Professor Temple Grandin,
Okay.
and I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you for the conversation.
All right, well, good to talk to you. I'm going to sign off right now.
Okay, well, if you're still hearing me now, then you've made it to the end of this conversation. Whether you've been watching on YouTube, whether you've been listening on Spotify or some other streaming platform, I really appreciate you being here, so thank you. It's worth noting that in this conversation with Temple, I was really trying not to turn it into a debate. She's very much an insider in the meat industry now, and I do feel like she's an apologist, and I do feel like some of the videos that she's put out there with the meat industry are misleading the public into thinking that their meat are coming from more ethical sources than they actually are. But I think it's worth noting that while I think the meat industry have this desire to change the public perception so that they eat more meat and make more money, I don't believe that this is Temple's motivation when she's making these videos. I believe that she genuinely wants to reduce animal suffering and show how it can be done in a way that causes less suffering to animals so they're less miserable. I don't think she's trying to mislead the public so that people buy more meat. I genuinely think she's coming from a good place with this, but in a way I think you could argue that the meat industry are using her to try and propagate the humane myth. But I think it's important to remember that when I asked Temple Grandin about her motivations for her career in relation to animals, she cites reducing animal suffering as the spark that's encouraged her to start doing any of this. And at times I do find myself getting frustrated that she wouldn't acknowledge that the vast majority of farmed animals are living miserable lives. I mean, that's the way it is. And she won't deny that that's the case, but she won't come out and say it. And from my perspective, I feel like that's a disservice to the animals. I think we have to acknowledge the reality of what's actually happening. Otherwise, we're going to mislead the public into thinking that their animal products are coming from ethical sources when they're coming from terrible places. But I do try and see it from her perspective, where she's working within the meat industry and she feels like she has to have a good relationship with people in meat companies so that they can allow her to create incremental changes. And of course, when we do talk about specific standard practices in the meat industry, like gestation crates, like keeping hens in cages, she's quick to condemn these specific things. It's just when we take a more broad perspective, she doesn't want to be seen as someone who's going against the meat industry, I suppose. Yeah, it's difficult. I hope if nothing else, you found the conversation interesting at times. I understand that Temple is going to be a controversial figure in the vegan community, and that's completely understandable. But I made a post about Temple Grandin on my Instagram the other day, and there was so much hostility towards her. There were people saying that she's evil. There were people saying that she literally has no empathy for any animals whatsoever. There's just no empathy there. And after talking to her, it's clear to me that just isn't the case. She does empathize with animals. Like I said, she cites animal suffering as the motivation for why she started in the first place. And she wouldn't speak out against practices like gestation crates if she didn't think that these things were bad for animals. I mean, she literally is trying to make things better for animals. She's trying to make them suffer less. And look, I disagree with her about the prospects of a humane animal farming system, and I'm disappointed that she won't condemn the meat industry more broadly. But to say that she hasn't got any empathy for animals is just blatantly not true. She is an empathetic person. Just look at the way she was talking about COVID-19 and how moved she was by that story of someone seeing something that they don't like and then trying to make things better. I really believe she wants to make the world a better place. And look, we have to remember that Temple is a woman in her 70s who spent her entire life working in the meat industry. She's part of this community. The people around her are all part of this community. And I think we have to take into consideration where the person is at when we're talking to them. I don't think it's productive to just talk to every human being exactly the same and not alter your message depending on who you're talking to and what their current beliefs are. And while I disagree with Temple Grandin on lots of things, and there are some things she's done that I think would cause harm, overall, I respect Temple for putting the well-being of animals on the map. And she's an inspiration to so many people for what she's achieved and the barriers she's overcome throughout her life. Anyway, in a lot of ways, I found it quite a difficult discussion to navigate. I hope that you found some value in it. You know, I have some very interesting guests coming up on this podcast, so do subscribe if you want to see those. And that's probably enough of me rambling about this conversation, but I hope you have a great day. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon with another video.